So hey everyone, welcome to Her Love of Sports, where we are highlighting professional women in the sports industry. My name is Katie Hamilton. I'm a technical soccer coach, sports reporter, and host of Her Love of Sports. We look forward to bringing to you interviews and in-depth conversations with pro athletes, coaches, and much more. Joining us today is Canadian Olympian and Rugby Canada national team athlete, Pamphinette Buisa. Pamphinette, welcome to Her Love of Sports.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We're so excited to have you. So we've known each other for maybe about a year. So I think it was 2021. We did something with Pacific FC and Palmaduca for Black History Month where we got to meet you. And ever since we've met on a few events and stuff like that. So I'm very excited to hear your sports story and journey.
Yeah, I'm super excited to share.
Perfect. Okay, so let's jump into it. I'd love to know. So you are on Canada's rugby national team. You play for the sevens, correct? Have you played for the 15s as well?
Yeah, so I've been officially on the sevens team for 6 years, and then my first debut with the 15s team was in 2018, and then now this year is going to be the World Cup year, so my goal is to also make it for the World Cup for sevens and 15s.
Wow. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. How did you get into rugby? Because at least for me in Victoria growing up, it wasn't like a huge call, Soccer was pretty big, dance, all those kind of sports. But rugby, I knew there was some middle school. I know my cousin played. But besides that, it wasn't like a huge calling for us. There wasn't that much opportunity. So how did you start your journey in rugby?
Yeah, so I grew up in Gatineau, actually. I was born in Ottawa, then moved to Gatineau, Quebec. And I actually started with basketball. So I was a huge basketball player, ball was life. But I was just honestly too aggressive. I got fouled out pretty much every game. I was just too aggressive. And I remember the rugby coach was watching me play and he's like, why don't you try a sport where you're allowed to hit people? And so then I tried rugby and I was like this lanky girl trying to, super muscular, but kind of awkward and tall. And then I found rugby and I was completely embraced for my physicality and I never looked back. So I started playing with basketball and volleyball. Those were my two first loves, and then kind of fell into rugby and then kind of continued on in that trajectory, and that brought me all the way to the West Coast, and I've been on the team ever since.
Wow, that's awesome. So what age do you think it was that you that you had to choose and just go into rugby? Because we talked about this before on other episodes of having multi-sport athletes, which I think is so big for your game, right? But sometimes there does come a point where you have to choose. What was kind of your age and your experience with, like you said, you loved rugby. What was that journey like, choosing rugby and then sticking with it?
Yeah, so I was around the age of 17, and it was very much between basketball, again, fouled out all the time, wasn't really the sport for me, but volleyball was definitely a sport I wanted to continue in, but it was just financially too expensive, so I couldn't afford to pursue volleyball. Rugby was a cheaper alternative. All you need is a mouth guard and some cleats, and it was cheaper, and so I was playing, the club level with volleyball, provincial, making my way, trying to play eventually for the Canadian team. But again, financially, it just was a barrier that I couldn't continue in it. So rugby, what I appreciated about it was that it wasn't that expensive starting off. And there was just a huge community pull. A lot of my coaches knew that was a barrier for me. And a lot of them, would pick me up, it'd be me and another player, and it'd be on a Saturday. We're just passing the ball around, and a lot of them, would just donate money to just make sure that the financial burden to be there wasn't a thing. And so, for myself and some of my other teammates, financially, it was difficult to make way, but a lot of people invested in our development, which allowed for us to be in the predicament they're in now. So it's awesome to see how much community investment was put in early on to allow for to be in that space. But volleyball deep down is still my love, and I still love it, but I'm also really happy with where I am now.
Absolutely. So is there much opportunity then? So is there high school for rugby as well? Did you have a girls rugby team, or was it co-ed at all?
It was, so at that time, so I started in grade 7, and I think grade 7, you're 12-ish, 12, 13. But at that time, there wasn't a lot of like the grade sevens that were playing. And so it was like, there was like a few grade sevens playing, but then it was mainly like all the senior players. And so it was like, I was super young, super out of my element at, when I first thought about it. But it started off like there was a women's team, and luckily in our area, I went to Philemon Wright High School. There was quite a bit of history with women rugby, and there was also quite a bit of rivalry with different teams. So it was cool because there was that engagement and investment in women's sport. And so it was cool to feel like you are an athlete. You're not just like a girl in sport, but you're an athlete, and your gender wasn't something that was highlighted. So it was really cool to come into a culture that was already established. And then through there, like my high school coach was like, why don't you try the club team? And then from there, they're like, why don't you try for the provincial team? And that was kind of, scary because also in our community, like not a lot of, like I'm Congolese. Both my parents come from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so, soccer is more of a sport that they knew, but rugby was not a sport that they knew. And on top of that, you're hitting people. So they're like, why do you want to play a sport like that? So it was definitely convincing them, but also assuring them that, there's people investing in my development. So, come along on this ride. So it was cool to come into that.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. Did you really feel that? So you felt that support, you said community-wise. Did you feel it as well from your teammates and from your coaches as well?
I think it was definitely from my coaches primarily. I think it was quite intimidating because, I was oftentimes the only Black girl in the space, and a lot of people were used to what they were used to, and it didn't look like me. And so for me, it was always feeling, imposter syndrome, not like feeling like I had a space simply because I didn't see anybody that necessarily looked like me. But I think what really, really was important for me was just the investment of my coaches. I think all of my coaches were people who made sure that I had a place and that I felt welcome. And I think they created a culture that allowed for me to feel fully present and to feel like I belonged. And I think with how it was set up with the leadership, I think that set the platform for me, making space and getting to know my teammates and also feeling confident. And I think especially as a young athlete, that confidence is super important to even want to continue, because I think at the ages like 12, 13, 14 are the ages you see drop off of a lot of girls in sports. So I think it was really important for me, especially at that time of the insecurities and navigating puberty and all these things, was to have that investment from my coaches and create a team culture that allowed for me to want to continue. And then on top of that, create a space where all of my teammates wanted to continue as well.
That's wonderful. And I think that's why I love seeing what you're doing and talking with you and following your journey, because I think you're just so inspiring. And exactly what you've said is just to be you're a role model for all athletes, regardless of gender, age, or anything. And so it is very inspiring. And to see you talk about how you were back then and to see it resemble in how you are now, I think it's wonderful. And it's great to have you on this platform to hopefully inspire others to follow their dreams and to follow it. So that's wonderful. So then that brought you out to the West Coast, to Victoria. So the national rugby team, we have one here. So it's out in Langford. You have a great setup. So what was that transition like coming out here?
It was a huge transition. So again, in our community, in our culture, women don't typically leave home until they're married. So convincing my African parents that I'm going to play the sport where you pass backwards, and I don't know anybody that lives near me, but trust me, I got it. And at the time also, when I was moving to Victoria, I had dislocated my shoulder. So I also came injured. And there was no guarantees for me to be on the national team, but what I appreciate about my parents is in their journey of even coming to Canada, it was really important for them to have the backing of their family. And they also said that there was no one in their life that held them back. And so they never wanted to be in the way of my dreams. And I think they really trusted me. And I think when I moved out here, had a dislocated shoulder, I was kind of living precariously, like living on my friend's couch because I was just 17, turning 18. And I was playing for UVic. And again, I was injured. So I didn't play most of the season. I played 3 games for them total. But I think for me, I never took no for an answer. And I think that's what helped me a lot, was that I was very stubborn. And I also was kind of like, if I shoot my shot and I try and put myself in the space to be in the space to win, then at least I know I tried. And so I came to Victoria not knowing if I was going to be on the national team. So I came and I played at UVic, and I remember I played 15s, and I got a message from the head coach being like, I don't know if you're geared for sevens. And I was like crushed, because I was like, I came here across Canada to be on this team, and like the feedback I'm getting is that I'm maybe not even in the running to do that. And so I just kind of went back to my why, and that was, I told myself I wanted to be an Olympian. And that was shortly a few months before going to the Youth Olympics. And I had already told myself that maybe the coach doesn't know yet, but this is something that I believe and will make sure it happens. And so I just kept working. And a few months later, I got an email. The coach was like, you're improving. I was sent a tape of your game. We'd like to offer you carding to be officially on the team. And that was like a moment that I will never forget. It was in 2016. I officially got asked to be on the national team in the February of 2016. And it was really hard because it was also the Olympic year. I was very raw. Like, all the people I watched on TV was now my teammates. And I was like trying not to fangirl, because like, now you're my teammate. But I think being humbled also to be around the best in the world was something I've always wanted to be and aspired to be. And I was just so thankful that resiliency, but also like my stubbornness. And even though people around me didn't know my why, I was very strong on my why, and I didn't let that fluster, even when met with obstacles.
Absolutely. And then look at you now, right? You're fresh off the Olympics as well. You were in Tokyo. But first, you mentioned, so you were crushed when at first your coach said that you weren't suited for the sevens. Just for listeners, can you kind of explain, because they are quite different, is the sevens and the 15s and kind of the different roles that you do play on both teams?
Yeah. So in sevens, so it's very fast. So it's 7-minute halves. You only have 7 people on the field. So basically, it's a 14-minute game. It's go, 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 and it's the Olympic sport. Right now, 15s, you have 50 minutes. So you have 15 players. It's a 40-minute half. So it's essentially a 90-minute game. So you have a 10-minute break in between. In sevens, usually it's faster, a lot more evasive, and it's the same space in terms of field space as 7s and 15. So 15 is a lot more contact, a lot more physicality. There's a bit more range and also body types. So it's a slower game, but it's a lot more physical. So a lot more big hits in that. So in at UVic at the time, there was a 15s game, 15s team, and so my role on the 15 side is, again, it hasn't really changed much. I think I'm still very, very aggressive. My physicality is kind of my strong suit, but in sevens, a bit more evasion, a bit more heads up, because you have to cover the whole field, and you have only 7 people and only 7 minutes per half to do something with it. So it's quick, very, very quick.
And you just talked about it, like how the physicality as well as the strength and the speed. So what's that kind of like training your body? Because I know I've watched you guys and you are just absolute athletes. I mean, the strength, I've seen some of your videos of you guys in the gym, just powerlifting, and it's incredible. And then watching your games and seeing that speed, how is it like training up for it, balancing your body, having that both physicality and the speed all wrapped into one?
Yeah, so it's awesome that we have such a good strength and conditioning coach. So basically our week, we train Monday through Friday. Friday we have speed session, we have a skill session, so more rugby focused, and then we have weights. Tuesday it's rugby specific, but it's conditioning, so they're running you to the ground until you can't anymore. And then usually with that they'll top it off with more just straight running. Wednesday we'll do sometimes we'll do combat, so we'll be actually in a kind of martial arts room doing physical, aggressive, grappling, tackling work. And then again, more conditioning. Thursday, we'll have more speed focus, longer speed session, skills, again, more rugby focus. And then Friday, it's just kind of, they just run you till you can't. So more rugby focus, speed, and weights. So it's pretty a lot. I think what helps, especially when I first came into the program, was huge on nutrition and recovery, because you're working go, go, go. And I think for a lot of people, when they watch rugby, they're watching the outcomes of that training, right? So I think most of our time is dedicated to training. And then you only have 6 to 7 tournaments a year. But most of the time you're training. So that bounce back factor of training, recovering, sleeping, nutrition is super important. So even on your weekends, you're still thinking and calculating, am I making sure I'm eating enough? Am I fueling enough? Am I having enough water? Am I watching video? So on top of all of that, you're still watching video, making sure that you're better for the next day.
Do you get any downtime to just be Pamphinette with your friends?
I think as I evolved on this team, I think, I'm also still a student, so my entire time on the program, I've always been in school. So I was still kind of, depending on the season, part-time student, full-time athlete. So my time is also taken into studying political science, and my minor is in social justice as well. So like, I think it was finding what are my other passions outside of rugby. And I think, as with everyone, the pandemic was huge for me, particularly to see myself also outside of just being a rugby player. I think, especially when you play rugby, a lot of your identity, or just as an athlete, a lot of your identity is tied to like how you play and how you feel and your confidence. And when you don't have that, I talk to a lot of people who are, retire beyond sport. It becomes kind of scary to figure out who are you outside of sport. And I think with the pandemic, humbling everyone and having to redefine how they interact with one another, you have to find who are you. And I think for me, it was getting into community, finding a lot of passion projects, honing in on the skills that I love and appreciate, and finding ways to be creative of how we can create community outside of the ones that we're comfortable with, but also those that have been not a part of community for some time.
And you are an advocate as well as some of your teammates, and you have those passion projects and stuff. What made you want to dive more into that? I know with the Black Lives Matters as well as with the Indigenous, you are very vocal on that, as well as social media, the rallies and everything, which is very inspiring and amazing to watch, especially with someone with a platform like yourself of being a professional athlete. So just again, like what really motivated you and got your eyes caught on this to pursue it further?
Yeah, it was crazy. It literally took, so everything kind of happened all at once. So it happened in 2020. It was supposed to be the Olympic year, but that was also the year, COVID went crazy. And so the Olympics was then postponed. At the time I was working part-time at a hotel, that all of a sudden transitioned into a temporary housing shelter. So here I was used to getting, hotel people, guests coming in, and I'm treating them in a certain way. Now I'm getting people who are, formally unhoused. And because rugby was no longer on, I needed another full time. So I was working full time at a hotel that was now a shelter. And I think meeting people who live like 10 minutes away from me, and realizing that I had no idea of what was going on literally 10 minutes away from me. And here I am traveling the world and seeing all these things. And I think I noticed a couple of things. Like I remember I was at the Pan American Games, and we're in Peru, and we're singing the national anthem, and we're playing in the gold medal game before the game, and I'm looking outside of the stadium, and we're just outside of a favela, out of the ghettos and really low income environments. And I was just seeing that like a lot of the moments that I have been experiencing, sometimes at the expense of someone else, and to the point where I have blinders on and I don't even see what's happening just outside of the doors. And I think for me, it was really important to listen and also chip away at my comfort, because I think as an elite athlete, you travel, you see the world, you see all these great things, but not knowing, the bus driver's name when he's bringing you to and from your place, or not knowing, the person changing your towels in your hotel room. I think those are the moments that I realized that I can't just be comfortable in this elite space. A lot of people are pushed out of these spaces, and in order for my experience to be my experience, has been oftentimes at the expense of someone else's. And so my time at the hotel was very, very pivotal into understanding so much of society that has not been a part. And I think that's why a lot of the people I would notice was like there was an overrepresentation of Indigenous people in these spaces. And I'm having conversations about, learning about their family, learning about history. And then on top of that, I have my degree in political science. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I only heard about theories in class, but I never knew the bodies and humans behind these theories. So having that eye opener and with the murder of George Floyd, that kind of like really kicked everything off as to realizing that I mean, my first ever rally was my own, and over 1,000 people showed up. And then my second ever rally, over 10,000 people showed up. And I was just kind of realizing that here I was thinking I didn't have a voice because I was so comfortable just representing Canada that I oftentimes hid behind that and I never showed up as myself. And I think the pandemic pushed me to show up as myself and use the voice I do have to amplify and also to listen more than I speak. And I think that was really important for me.
Powerful, just powerful. Everything you said, it's outstanding. What would you say for people that want to get more involved? What would you suggest for people or ways that they can get more involved?
Yeah, I think it's figuring out what you're passionate about. I think for me, like my degree is in political science, minor in social justice. So I always cared about people. I think it's leaning into to listening to what's already happening, but also being also very aware of what's around you. For me, I always noticed that there was a lot of people that thought like me, talked like me, looked like me physically and things like that. And so when I noticed that there was a huge demographic of people that weren't a part of the conversations, I needed to meet people where they're at. And so for me at that point was like being around more people who were unhoused, going out in the streets and having those conversations. And then on top of that, behind the scenes is not expecting them to tell me their whole life story, but doing my own research. So do your own research, look what's around you, and then get involved. Ask questions. And I think that's the first thing, is that it's not enough to have the intent of doing something. You have to intentionally take the time to learn, to then know what questions to ask, and then, get involved in that way.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes too, it's what are the questions to ask, but like you said, it's to educate yourself a little bit more so you can find those questions. Because you travel so much, were there other cities that kind of impacted you for what you're doing in your causes?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I always talk about my first time ever going to Africa, and that was my tournament in Cape Town in South Africa. And it was, so before my parents moved to Canada, they actually lived in South Africa. And it was so cool to go back to the motherland in Africa and see what that was like without them there, because I think literally as soon as we got at the airport, we got met with an orchestra, literally people singing. And that was like after, I don't know, a 14-hour flight, and there's just people drumming and singing and just that warm embrace. And then I remember just like running out on the field, and there was like thousands of people watching us, all cheering and just enjoying the sport of rugby. I think it was just such a beautiful moment to almost feel connected and just kind of reconnect with my roots, and knowing that there was so much history of like rugby there, but also just like my familial ties that was there, that really honed in that like through sport, so much power can be done to connect people and to unify people. And I think it's such an agent of change, where you can, even when we talk about rugby in South Africa, just how rugby was able to unify, Black people, white people, all types of people together. And I think sport has just such a huge, and I firmly believe that it has such a beautiful opportunity and huge way to change society and movements and create change. And I think that being in South Africa was so eye-opening as to how big we can bring people together.
What would you say your personal goals are for this? Like, where would you like to take your education, your career outside of rugby? What are your goals?
Ooh, I feel like it keeps changing. I feel like, my rugby goals, of course, this year we have the World Cup. We have 2 World Cups. We have the Commonwealth Games as well. So my goal is to wear the jersey, represent, and show, what the sport is made of. I think when it comes to my activism is just to be an ambassador for sport, for women in sport, for Black women in sport. And I think just being an advocate of change. I was thinking at the beginning that I wanted to go into politics and things of that sort. I think it's honestly like where it's called to develop more community, whether that's internationally, in international development, whether that's traveling the world. I love traveling, and finding ways that we can bring people in. I think it's finding ways that we can meet people where they're at, and whether it's through sport, whether it's through activism, whether it's through just common causes that transcends sport. Like I always say transcend sport because I play sport and it's a vehicle of change. And the more I'm in different spaces, the more change can happen. And I think the more that, whether it's at the Olympics, whether it's at the World Cup, is allow for people to feel like they can be seen. And if we do that, I think just in my experience working with a lot of people who have been experiencing homelessness, knowing someone's name, acknowledging someone's presence, just a little thing just to humanize someone and not focus on their condition is night and day. It's the difference between someone wanting to live and someone not wanting to. And I think the more that I can be in those spaces to humanize someone, that's where I see myself to do in the future.
Absolutely. It's just, I love hearing you speak, Pam, because it's beyond the sport, right? You're connecting just with the community. And like you said, it's the little things of having someone make their day or not, right? By knowing their names and just really appreciating where you're coming from. What would you say for young girls that are wanting to pursue a professional sport or more specifically rugby? What recommendations, what advice would you give to them?
I would say you got to know your why. You got to know why you want to do it. I think a big eye opener literally after the Olympics was realizing, I played rugby a lot, was just to make my parents proud. That was number one, was to make them proud, make them, feel like every decision that they made up until this point, to leave everything they knew back in Congo, to come to Canada and restart and go back to school. I wanted to make sure that they felt, validated. And that was a huge part as to what my why was. You got to know why you're doing it. And that why needs to ground you even on the hardest days. I think people sometimes ask me, how do you stay motivated? I'm like, I don't stay motivated, but my why doesn't change. And so that's what keeps me grounded. I'd also say you got to be open to feedback, but also knowing who's giving you that feedback. I think for me was having coaches that I knew always had my best interests at heart. They were never there to bring me down. They were never there to make me feel not in my power. And I think that was really pivotal to make sure my development was there, was because I always had people in my circle that pushed me, made me want to do better, knew what I needed to be better. And also knowing who wasn't trying to do that, is understanding when people were like, oh, like, we're going to go out this weekend and do whatever. I'm like, you guys are here for this, but I'm trying to go far. Like I'm going to go far. And I think making everybody also around me know that that's what my why is, they just stopped asking me certain questions. They just stopped putting that in my space, because they also knew that in order for me to get where I need to go, we all got to be on the same page, and I think that was really important. So knowing my why, making sure I'm grounded in that, having the people around me to make sure I'm pushed and elevated to a space where we're bringing all of us forward, but also knowing what do I need to cut out to make sure that I can get to that space. Those are the three pivotal things to get me forward.
I think those are all great things too, just in life that will help you out, right? It's not just sport related. Those are just for everything in your careers, in your personal life, in your business life, everything. Okay, let's go into a couple rapid fire questions. Who did you look up to as an athlete growing up?
I would say Magali Harvey. It was actually crazy. Magali Harvey was named one of the best rugby players in the world. When I first moved to Victoria, I slept on her couch for like 6 months. And she was like my big sister. I was like 17, turning 18. She was on the program for a long time. And she was just such a class act, like an amazing player, amazing player, but also super soft-spoken, but also very like disciplined. Like I remember, especially when I was beginning, I was like, oh, let's go get some popcorn and do this and that. And she was like, you got to train tomorrow, go to bed. And so she was
you in line.
Awesome. Yeah, she kept me in line. Yeah.
Okay. If you could choose anywhere that you haven't traveled to, where would you want to go?
That's a great question. Just for rugby or for anything?
Let's say for rugby, and then if it's a different one, for anything. If you could play a tournament anywhere.
Ooh, okay. If I could play a tournament anywhere, it'd probably be Hong Kong. We were supposed to have a tournament in Hong Kong last year. Their stadium is like massive. I keep hearing how great the crowd is. It's super crazy apparently. And we were supposed to play, but because of COVID, it was canceled. I heard playing there is crazy. And if I could visit anywhere, it'd probably be Congo. I've never been. I feel such a strong tie, and I watch everything on social media, and my parents, of course, and there's a huge Congolese community back in Ottawa, Gatineau, but I got to go see where I come from.
Nice. I love it. Do you have any siblings?
I do.
Is
I
it
have a
just
little
yourself?
sister.
A little sister. Is she into
Yeah.
sports at all? Rugby?
She is. She does it. She tried rugby, and then my sister's actually the baller of the family, so she plays for Carleton University. She's in her second or
Nice.
third year. They are doing really well. Yeah, she's great.
Nice. Shout out to your sister.
Yeah.
If you could, what would you say that your rugby highlight career moment would be? You went to the Pan Am Games, you went to the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Or besides that, what would you say would be your number one moment?
I think my highlight number one moment was going to the World Cup in San Francisco. And my dad was able to come, and it was the first time he ever saw me wear the jersey in person. Usually he watches all my games, but that was the first time he saw me in person. And I remember he was like, when you get a try is a goal in rugby. And he's like, when you get a try, like, I want you to do something. So I remember I was going in the end zone to score. And instead of just putting the ball down where I was supposed to, I like saw a girl and I like ran over her and I like got the try. It was like super obnoxious, but like that was from my dad, and like I'll never forget that moment.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's awesome. Do you have any pregame routines that you do? Any superstitions?
Not too much superstitions for me. Like I have to get a good stretch. Usually I'll be like bumping some gospel music, and I'll do a little dance session. But when we're in the actual changing room, I like to just feed off of my teammates' vibes. I'm like not a huge dancer, but I'll hit a couple moves here and there, and then like hone in
Nice.
afterwards. But yeah.
You guys seem to have a really great connection, all your teammates. I just love it. Like I said, my office is right across from the stadium, and I love seeing you guys. You always look like you're having a great time. You're focused, you're determined, and just a great group of athletes. Any final words that you'd like to say? Anything that we missed? Do you think we missed anything about Pamphinette?
Well, I just say that, like, I think there's so much beauty happening in the sport of rugby, and I think particularly with our team and a lot of the waves that we've been able to do to bring things forward, I couldn't have done anything without my teammates. I think it's really hard, especially with high performance sport, because a lot of things that happen to you is experienced by only a few people, and a lot of people just see what's happening outside. But I think what makes a successful team isn't always the outcomes of how the game goes, but I think it's the connections that you make that are lifelong is super important. I just think about the 6 years that I've been in the program, that I've known all my teammates. I think the connections that we've made, the bonds that we've made, the crying on the field to running out to singing, in the changing room, whatever it may be, those are all the moments that make me where I'm at today. So I couldn't have done anything without my teammates.
Well, Pam, it's been amazing having you here on Her Love of Sports. I get inspired by you every day. I love seeing what you're doing. I'm so happy to know you and to have you on Her Love of Sports. I hope to have you again down the road. It'd be lovely to hear more about you. But again, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
To catch all the latest, make sure to follow us on social media at Her Love of Sports and check out herloveofsports.com.